Hello everyone, this is Mike Fauché, and in today's video we're going to take a look at how to set up OpenVPN on your QNAP NAS unit. With all the vulnerabilities and all the attacks on NAS units lately, as well as other devices, it's time that we learn how to securely access our devices when we're away from home. If you want to learn more about this free tool and how it can help protect you, then stick around and watch the rest of this video. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and hit that notifications icon so you'll be notified when there's new content. One of the challenges with connected devices is always deciding between convenience and security. Many of the devices that we buy today either need to access the internet, or worse, we need to get access to these devices, such as smart home stuff, storage units, files, and security cameras when we're away. As consumers, there's two areas that we should be concerned about. One is isolating our IoT devices from our networks, which I've covered in a separate video. And the second is how we can securely gain access to our devices and files when we're away from home, which is the topic of today's video. It has always been my opinion that you want to restrict access to your home network as much as possible, and that all connections coming into your network always be encrypted. One of the best ways to do this is to use your own VPN. Before getting into the specifics on how to do this, let's go over a quick chart and see how VPN works, as well as discuss the differences in approach between hosting your own VPN and going through a cloud-based VPN. Let's break down this chart a little bit so we can better understand the differences between things like a cloud-based VPN such as ExpressVPN and hosting our own VPN. So if you look at the chart, you'll see that typically in a cloud-based VPN, what happens is your client device, such as your phone, your mobile device, your laptop, your whatever you're on, actually connects through a client to a cloud service. That cloud service then relays you out to the internet. So basically, the advantages are it hides your identity. It's pretty easy to set up, and it really doesn't require any hardware to be on your network. The disadvantages is that typically, although it is possible, it makes it a little bit more difficult to access your own devices and your network. It's used to hide your identity and to access other parts of the world, but it doesn't do a whole lot for accessing our internal network. OpenVPN, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. Your client device does hook up just as it does on a cloud-based, but rather than hook up to a cloud service, it actually hooks up directly to your external IP. And then once it actually hits that, it goes into your router where you've created a port forward, and the router actually takes you to the OpenVPN server that you have via the QNAP. And what happens, it sounds a little bit more complicated, but when we break it down, you'll see it's pretty easy. What happens is all that traffic actually goes through the OpenVPN server, and it gets routed both to your internal network as well as your external. So it becomes your new gateway. So your traffic is encrypted from the point of the client to your OpenVPN server. However, once you leave, it becomes just like if you were surfing the internet from home. So the advantages of that is that it still does hide your identity to some degree, typically only where you connect. So for example, if you're at Starbucks or whatever, your connection will be encrypted from your local Starbucks to your OpenVPN router. The other advantage is it gets you full access to everything that's on your internal network. So all your devices, files, anything you want to get to. And there's really no cloud hop. So no external VPN providers actually knows you exist. And you gain a little bit of versatility. Because you can control everything in your network, you do gain versatility in how you use it. So that's basically the overview. And today we're going to talk mostly about OpenVPN, because if you want to do cloud-based, there is a whole bunch of videos on the specific cloud providers that you can access. So we're not going to cover any of that today. So now that you've decided to set up your own VPN server, let's go through the steps on how to do that. So the first thing you have to do is to make sure that you have an application called QVPN service. In some cases, it's there by default, and other cases you have to go to the App Center and actually download it. So if you don't have it, just go to the App Center. In the search box, just type QVPN, and it shows up. So if you don't have it installed, go ahead and install it. So on the premise you have it installed, let's go through the quick configuration as it's pretty easy to configure. Okay, so there are multiple VPN services that are supported by the QVPN application. The first one being a Qbelt. I'll do a separate video on the Qbelt. There are some advantages. There's also some disadvantages. My preference is still to go to OpenVPN. But you have a choice of multiple types of VPNs you can configure. But for today's video, let's talk about OpenVPN. So if I go to OpenVPN, the process is rather simple. First thing I have to do is, of course, enable it. Let's hit apply. There are a couple other things that I'm going to probably want to look at. So for starters, make sure the IP range you're comfortable with. 99.9% of the time, you don't have to change it, and the default will work just fine. There is one thing you might want to consider doing. The server port is by default 1194, and it works fine. There's not a whole lot of reasons to change it, but understand that you can. Understand this is a default port, so if you want to go to the next level security, or if you really don't like to use default ports, which is kind of what I like to do, you can change this. So you can make this, one of the ones I use is 2194, just to be a little different, just so that if there's scans against port 1194, for a future vulnerability, it's not going to find yours because it's not on the default port. For the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to go ahead and leave it to the default. But the one thing that you need to understand is that any changes you make to the port, you'll have to download a new configuration file. We'll get to that here in a second. Here you can set the maximum number of clients, and that's totally arbitrary. I mean, its default is 5, and unless you've got a unique situation, that works fine. You're going to leave the encryption method at the highest. And the adapter is kind of important. If you're running multiple adapters, I realize there are multiple adapters on the QNAP units. However, if they're connected, you might want to actually pick this. So if you have multiples, you're going to want to pick the adapter that you're using. So in my case, I'm only running one adapter, and that's a 10 gig adapter. So I'll leave it alone. Understand, if you don't pick the right adapter, it's not going to know which IP address to go to. The DNS service, I usually leave alone. I don't want to do anything with that. I usually leave it at the NAS default. And this one's important to me, is to use connection as the default gateway. And what that means is, if you refer back to the chart that we did earlier in a video, when the traffic comes in from the outside world, from your WAN connection, and it obviously gets routed through port forwarding to your QNAP NAS. However, if you don't select this box, the internet traffic itself will be routed directly to the internet. So it's not going to go back out through your connection. What you want to be able to do is tunnel all your traffic through your OpenVPN and your own home internet connection. So if you are somewhere like Starbucks or the airport, you can surf the internet a little safer. So by tunneling all your internet traffic through your OpenVPN server, it's far more secure than just running your files and accessing your devices through the OpenVPN, but running all your internet traffic out through wherever you are. And then optionally, you can decide whether or not you want to enable or compress the VPN link. And basically what that does is does on-the-fly compression of data. And there is a slight impact of performance, but you know, if you're on a really low connection, it might make sense to do that. So what you need to do is, after all this is set up, you have to hit apply. So I'm going to basically leave everything the way I have it configured now, hit apply. It's going to tell me it's going to apply these settings, takes a couple of seconds, and it's done. Now, the last step, and after you've played around and made all your changes, and there's not many changes to make, but once you've done all of this, the next step is to download the configuration file. I don't know of any case where you're going to download this version 1.0. The one you want to download is the newest configuration file. So if I click on that, it'll actually download, and you can see it here. It's actually downloading the configuration file. And again, this is what we're going to use to set up all of our clients. So it's an important file, and you want to make sure that all the settings have been done. One last time, I want to remind you that if you go back in and change a port, change an IP address, change an adapter, change anything in this configuration file, you need to re-download this configuration file and reinstall it. And we'll get into the client installation here in just a second. So now that we've configured the OpenVPN server, and we've downloaded our configuration file. There's one last thing we have to do, and that's to make sure that the users that are the NAS users can actually use the VPN. So if we click over here to privilege settings, we'll see a list of users. Currently, I've only got 2 users on there. So what we need to do is add a 3rd user. So I've created from the user section, I've created kind of a dummy user. So we'll go ahead and add that user in, and we'll use that as for all of our testing. So if we go down here to the bottom, we'll see the test user that I've created. And I'm going to go ahead and enable OpenVPN, and I can enable multiples if I want to. All I care about right now is OpenVPN. I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm just going to enable the test user to have access to OpenVPN, hit apply, and now my test user has access. So that's pretty much all I got to do, because once you've configured the server, you obviously have to tell it who has permission and who doesn't. So we're pretty much done with this now. So we can exit the server. And now let's move on into the firewall section. Now, because the firewalls are so different, I'm going to try to cover the concept. I'll show you how mine's configured. And I'm going to try to show you a couple of screenshots of some popular routers to give you an idea of how they're configured. But ultimately, forwarding a port 1194 to your NAS IP is going to have to require a little bit of research. So you're going to have to figure out, using your router, how to configure port forwarding and to get that port 1194 or 2194 or whatever port you end up using over to that IP address using your specific router configuration. So before I show you a couple of examples of port forwarding, let's just quickly understand the basic flow and how a port forward works. So if you're out here in your client, whether it's your iOS and you're at the Starbucks or whatever you're doing, or your laptop, and you load the client VPN, it's going to try and communicate with your home router modem. So the client access actually takes place, initializes the connection to your modem. Of course, your modem lets everything go through. That's not its job unless it's a modem firewall combination. But in essence, the data gets to the router. Now, the router has to be configured with a port forwarding because the data that's being requested, or the port that's being requested, needs to know where to go. It needs to know what your IP address is of your NAS. So inside the router, and whether or not that's a standalone router or a all-in-one, you need to create the port forward rule that port forwards the 1194 port to the IP address of your OpenVPN or your NAS. Once that connection's made, then data is allowed to pass through anywhere into your network and also be routed back out through the internet for purposes of tunneling. So let's quickly get an understanding of how mine is configured, and then I'll try and pull up a couple of examples of some other types of routers so you get a better idea, because not everybody uses Sophos and it may not make a lot of sense here. In essence, this is a firewall rule that says any source, meaning anything coming from the outside, from the original destination, which is my WAN, coming in on the OpenVPN service, which if I highlight that, I can see that it's port 1194, will maintain its original address and be translated to the destination port, which is my NAS unit. And it's going to keep the same OpenVPN 1194 port. So basically you have a loop. Any data that comes in from the WAN on the 1194 service from the client gets routed to the NAS unit, end of story. So it's a very simple loop. It just basically, your firewall takes all that traffic coming in on port 1194 and routes it to your NAS unit. As an alternate example, which is probably a little bit easier to follow, I pulled up the documentation for a ASUS RT AC66U, which is a pretty popular router as well. And if you can follow the same logic here, but it's actually done quite differently than what you saw on my Sophos router. But here, you're basically creating, down in this section here, you're basically creating a custom list. So you're going to put OpenVPN in the service name. You're going to put the 1194 in the port range. You're going to send it to the local IP, which is your NAS unit for where your OpenVPN server is. And it's going to be the same local port. So you're going to have 1194, your IP address, 1194. You can enable both protocols or just UDP. It doesn't really matter. Hit apply and you're done. So in this case, it's a lot more straightforward to set up with something like a ASUS router. But again, you're going to have to look up the actual documentation to your firewall router combo to get that data from your WAN connection over to your NAS, but only 1194. So let's get started on the client. So in order to get the client working, at least on your laptop or PC, you need to actually download the software. And you can get that from openvpn.net community downloads. And down here, you'll see the option of either a 32-bit or 64-bit installer. So I went ahead and installed the software already, so we don't need to go through that. It's a really simple, straightforward process. And what I also did is the configuration file that we downloaded from the server itself, which ends up in your default directory, and I'll show you what that looks like. It looks like this. So you have the OVPN file that you're going to use as your import. You're going to use that all the way across your clients. So you're going to use it on your laptop, you're going to use it on your iOS, and you're going to use it on your Android device. So to get that file loaded, it's a very simple process. Once the software is installed, you can kind of see it here. I'm just going to right click on it and we're going to import file. Now you can see I've already got two already imported. And the reason that I did that is I have the two different ports. So if you recall, during the earlier part of the video, we did a port 1194 and a port 2194. So I configured and tested both of those ports. But the process is very simple. You click on import file and we'll go over to our downloads directory and there's our file. So we'll just click on that, click open, and it will import. So now that we have it imported, to connect is really simple. You just right click, go to the profile that you want. And again, I suggest you name these a little bit more intuitive so you know which one's which. But I'm going to use number 2, click on connect. It's going to go through, prompt me for this is again the default user that I've created in my NAS. So it's going to prompt me for the username and the password. So I'll go ahead and put the password in and click OK. And it's going to go through and connect. And if you look down here, you'll see that I have a green icon, which tells me that I'm connected and ready to go. To disconnect is the reverse. I just connect up here and then hit disconnect. Basically, I've emailed my profile, which is my .ovpn file, and now my job is to actually install it into an iOS device. And the process is really simple. You basically tap on the attachment and you're going to say share, and it comes up and you notice there's an OpenVPN icon. So I'm going to click on OpenVPN and it will basically bring it in. Now I've got a duplicate file in here, so I'm not going to actually do it since the file already exists. But that's basically the process. You just click on add and you're on your way. And then once it's in the profile, I'll show you what that looks like. So once that's completed, now whenever we want to log in, we just open our VPN app. We pick the profile that we want. And there you see it connected. So I'm now connected to the VPN and I can now take and access my files. So for example, if I wanted to go ahead and access my QNAP files using Qfile, so I can go ahead and pop open Qfile. So as you can see, we were able to log directly into Qfile, and now I can access any of my NAS units. I can access my Wi-Fi, I can access my router, I can access anything I want just because I'm connected through a VPN. So pretty much whatever you've got connected to your LAN, you can actually go ahead and connect up from when you're away from home securely, because you've got a nice secure connection via VPN right into your network. So your QNAP's going to route traffic anywhere it wants to go. So I hope that kind of clarifies it. It's an extremely powerful tool. It is obviously a little inconvenient because you do have to set it up, but and you have to actually turn it on and off when you want to use it from your mobile device, whether it's your laptop or your iOS or Android. But, you know, once you get used to it, it only takes about a second or two, and the security trade-off is just phenomenal. So stay away from that MyCloud stuff, stay away from any of the other third-party services, and just stick with a direct connection to your network to access and to manage your files. Anyway, that's about it for today's video, and I hope you really found it useful. Remember to always minimize your threat surface by disabling all the services you don't need, and take the time to set up your VPN, whether it's the one in your router or the one in your QNAP. Just make sure you use one. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.